Hey, everybody. Welcome to our LinkedIn Live session for today, September the 15th, 2023. My name is Gino Parati, and I'm the founder, lead educator, speaker, and coach at Right Brain Journeys. And our topic for today is how to prevent burnout, specifically through recharging using rest, savoring, and one of my favorite things to do in the world, which is travel. I have a variety of resources, books today that I'm going to be sharing with you, and I'm weaving together the information from these different books to help us understand how those three things, rest, savoring, and travel, can help us have the ability to recharge and prevent burnout. So to do that, first I'm going to explain the format if you're new to these LinkedIn Live learning sessions that I've been doing for a while. We spend about somewhere between 15 to 20 minutes where I'm presenting the information to you in a type of lecture style. Then I'll open it up to 10 minutes of Q&A, so we can go up to 30 minutes if we would like. And in the meantime, feel free to type in the chat where you're joining from, and feel free to type any questions that you have about the content. And then I can see those and either answer them throughout the presentation when it seems most relevant, or we'll save that to the end where we have our up to 10 minutes of Q&A time. So again, if you're just joining, my name is Gino Parati. So the first thing I want to talk about is why this topic means a lot to me. And if you've been following me here on LinkedIn, you know I've been talking about this for at least a year, maybe longer. And that's because of my own professional background. Overall, the title of what I do, I'm an educator. So I teach at some colleges and universities. And then I also have my own work through Right Brain Journeys, which I advertise quite a bit here, promote quite a bit here on LinkedIn. And through that, I do learning and development services as well as coaching. So this work, it's very rewarding. You make a lot of relationships, you share a lot of insights, you help people transform their lives in positive ways. So it's very rewarding work. That's the one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is that this is also easy to get consumed in, where you really devote all your energy and your time. And as an empath, which we'll get into, someone who really feels deeply the emotions of others, it takes some work to be able to separate the emotions that you take on, absorb through this work. So that's where I'm talking about why it's so important. If you're an educator, if you're in any type of learning and development role, if you do coaching, then perhaps you can relate to this and you have experienced some of these symptoms that connect to create the syndrome of burnout. And then you'll understand why these resources such as rest, savoring, and travel are beneficial to you to help you really recharge. I have a bunch of books that I'm talking about today sitting around me, so I will hold them up here and you'll get to know those books. And I encourage you, I've read all of these cover to cover. They're really helpful resources. So if they sound interesting, give them a read for yourself. We'll start out here then with understanding why rest. As I mentioned, this work can be really rewarding as an educator, but it can also be completely consuming. So in this book, Rest, Why You Get More Done When You Work Less, really good book. It talks about on page 166 how rest allows us to recover through four major factors: relaxation, control, mastery experiences, and mental detachment from work. And I love this quote on page 166. It says, breaks that are high in all four are the equivalent of nutritious and nourishing meals. So in other words, this idea of keeping your cup full or self-care, so basically feeding yourself nourishing meals with that metaphor relating to rest. But of course, especially I can speak as a member of the United States culture, and especially as an educator during the school year, there is not much opportunity for rest. It's very much a go, 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 and constantly produce, constantly stay in motion, where our identities can be really connected by our activities. So to rest is something that's not highly promoted and it can be frowned on. But we may be depriving ourselves, according to the research in this book, on really essential, nourishing things that help our body. And the overall thesis of this book, it's the subtitle, Why You Get More Done When You Work Less, is understanding that rest and work are opposite sides of the same coin. So if you do love work so much and you get a lot of satisfaction out of producing quality work, you may want to start resting more so that you can continue to produce that quality. So it's interesting stuff. So I'm going to connect this idea of rest being important. Of course, it's important to everyone. I'm now hypothesizing, connected to another book I've read in the last year, that rest is especially important to those of us who are sensitive people. And a sensitive person is coming from this book, Sensitive, with the subtitle The Hidden Power of the Highly Sensitive Person in a Loud, Too Fast, Too Much World. Let me say that again. Sensitive, The Hidden Power of the Highly Sensitive Person in a Loud, Fast, Too Much World. So a very interesting book that identifies what defines a sensitive person and then goes into how important these qualities are, the benefits that these qualities offer not only to the person, but also to our greater society, and how in the United States, many times being called sensitive or being sensitive is seen as a negative and something to be fixed to make you tougher and make you stronger. But up to 30% of the population is sensitive, according to this book. And let's define that. This is coming from definitions from the book. Who are sensitive people? This is a quote. Sensitive people are those who, quote, absorb more sensory information, often unconsciously, so you're not aware, think more deeply, and find more interconnections among disparate things than less sensitive people typically do. So we are often taking in more information. I identify as sensitive personally. I believe I'm in that 30% of the population because I fit most of the characteristics. And those characteristics that the book describes are big emotions. In other words, feel things very deeply and very strongly. And physical senses are 5 senses that are more sensitive than many other people's. I'm often the first person in a group to say, do you smell that? And it might be someone's perfume on the other side of the room. Or did you hear that sound? No, not the loud one, the one that's underneath that, that's a little bit softer. Did you hear that? I'm also usually the person who notices when someone gets a new haircut, something like that. Changes rings, they don't wear the same ring that they usually do. I notice a lot of details. And that's why us sensitive people are picking up on these things. We are scanning the environment and we pick up on more than the average person does who don't identify as sensitive. So here's why I'm connecting this to rest. I hypothesize, so I don't have any scientific research to back this up yet, but I start the hypothesis with that those of us who are sensitive, about 30% of the population, that we are likely to experience the symptoms of burnout sooner than those majority of people, which would be about 70%, who are less sensitive. Here's why. There's amazing strengths that this book Sensitive covers that sensitive people have that allow us to tune into the world around us and try and make sense of all this data that we're picking up through our senses. But since we pick up on a lot of data, that means we're processing more. We're doing more work, even if it's unconscious. So these are the amazing strengths that are great benefits, but also may necessitate that we really rest if we're in that 30% of sensitive people. Empathy, which I've already mentioned early on. Creativity, which in the book Rest, it talks about how by resting, using different techniques, up to 10 different techniques of rest, there's evidence presented how we actually boost our creativity when we rest. Sensory intelligence, so we're picking up stuff from around the world, making sense of it. Depth of processing, so we take in that information as sensitive people and we process it more than the average 70% of the population. And we feel more deeply, so that depth of emotion. We pick up on the vibrations around us. And some of that means that I found as a sensitive person, and if you think you are as well, you might identify with this, that I often have to do think of the words I want to say for this. I have to sift and sort, almost like sifting through my emotions at the end of the day, and really think about whether what I'm feeling is mine based upon my own experiences of my own life, or if I absorbed the emotions of other people that I was working with throughout the day. Or perhaps, since I live in New York City, on the subway, I picked up on somebody's strong energy, and then I'm feeling that in my own body. So it's a way to mentally make sense of what I'm feeling inside. Is it mine, or did it belong to somebody else? Is it something I can release, or is it something that I'm holding on to? And that's helpful. But all of that, as a sensitive person, takes energetic bandwidth, right? So unconsciously and consciously, I hypothesize that as sensitive people, we may be doing more work than 70% of the population. So therefore, it might even be more essential that we get rest so that we don't tip over into burnout, which is where I'm moving next. I want to define burnout for you because this has become a very common term that we use. And it is an actual studied syndrome that is defined by the World Health Organization, which is WHO. That's the acronym WHO. So from this point forward, I'm just going to say WHO when I refer to World Health Organization. But there is an official definition of this, and it's related to three dimensions happening at one time. There's an amazing book that I've read in the past year called The Burnout Challenge, Managing People's Relationships with Their Jobs. And it's by Christina Masloch and Michael P. Leiter. Really good book. Here's how the WHO, World Health Organization, defines the definition of burnout. And before I get into the definition, I actually wanted to point out that this is in 2019 that the World Health Organization defined it. So what makes this interesting is that, of course, the COVID pandemic hit in 2020, which added so many additional layers of stress in work for so many of us throughout the world. I don't need to explain that. We already lived that, so we know it. So it was recognized as a legitimate workplace phenomenon that could negatively impact the well-being of workers in the workplace prior to the pandemic. And now, potentially, so how much more after the pandemic has happened, because there's more layers of stress. So here's the definition from WHO. Burnout is a syndrome conceptualized as resulting from chronic workplace stress that has not been successfully managed, and it's characterized by three dimensions. This is the important part. Three things showing up at the same time. Feelings of energy depletion, which we'll call exhaustion, increased mental distance from one's job, or feelings of negativism or cynicism related to the job. So we'll call that cynicism, and reduced professional efficacy, which we will call inefficacy. So burnout is three dimensions coming together at the same time: exhaustion, cynicism, feelings of inefficacy. They show up at the same time, and defining those, exhaustion is when we feel overwhelmed by our work demands, we feel drained, and we feel depleted of necessary resources. And I'm smiling because those of us who have been educators think we can relate to that. Again, it can be a very rewarding job, which is often what drives many of us, motivates us to continue to do the work, but it can leave us feeling completely depleted at the end of the day, at the end of the week. Cynicism, again, is that negatively and overly detached response to work. These definitions are coming from pages 34 and 35 of the Burnout Challenge. And over time, workers can develop an overly detached or cynical response, not only to the work they do, but also to the people that they work with. So as educators, as coaches, this is extremely important because in order to be effective, we have research on social emotional learning. It's developing a connection with the people that you're working with. So if you're feeling cynicism towards them, it's going to reduce your efficacy, which is now our third part. Inefficacy is when you feel powerless and lacking in achievement or productivity. So in other words, you don't think you have the capacity to do your job well. So again, burnout, we experience this syndrome when all three of these show up at the same time, which is exhaustion, cynicism, and inefficacy. Let's go into the next thing then, which is how do we start to manage it? Because the World Health Organization talked about burnout being not successfully managed. It's chronic workplace stress when these three dimensions show up and they're not successfully managed. The book does mention, which I think is a fantastic argument, is that burnout is not just the responsibility of the individual employee who's experiencing it. Burnout is a symptom of the atmosphere in which the employee is working. So there is an organizational response that is necessary to address it. But of course, I'm also a big believer in controlling what we can control. And as a result, you can't make your workplace do something. You can try to influence it, but the only control you have is over yourself. So the technique I'm going to share for managing burnout, it is a technique that you can try and apply for yourself. I've done it. And of course, I'll talk about how I've done it and how it's worked for me. And it's called savoring. So savoring is coming from this book, again, which I've read in the last year. Done a lot of reading this year. Surviving Teacher Burnout. And it's by Dr. Amy L. Ava. And in this, on pages 15 and 16 in this book, she talks about savoring. Savoring is a strategy that allows us to, direct quote, have an emotion. It's an emotion regulation strategy that focuses on the positive, and it can result in an emotion uplift. It's a way to slow down and take in positive emotions and experiences. When we savor, we aren't only feeling pleasure, but also acknowledging that pleasure and extending our enjoyment of that moment. According to psychologist Fred Bryant, savoring can become an acquired skill with time and practice. So, a couple insights there that I want to point out to us is that savoring for me is one of my favorite self care strategies because it allows me to consciously stop to rest, relax, and revitalize. It's one way that I keep my cup full so that I can continue to give quality time, quality active listening to my students and clients so that I can give them um, insights, information, encouragement, inspiration, the things that they need to be able to move forward. The other thing I really like about the savoring technique, which weaves us into our next book that I'm going to present, is that for so many of us teachers, academics, educators, coaches, we spend so much of our lives here in our head. It's such a cognitive experience. And when you're working 40 plus hours a week and spending that much time in your head, you can forget or neglect the fact that that head is attached to the rest of a body. So having a more balanced human experience. And the savoring takes us out of the cognitive world because in order to savor, you have to be able to use your five senses to take in this pleasurable things like pleasurable sights, pleasurable smells, pleasurable tastes. How do we take these experiences in from the world around us through our body and our senses? And then instead of analyzing those in a cognitive feature, just simply consciously drawing attention to the pleasure that our body feels from those beautiful sights, smells, tastes, etc., any of our five senses. So why this can be important is supported by a book by best-selling author Gretchen Rubin. Also, I've read this in the last year. It's Life in Five Senses. So in this book, Gretchen talks about the importance of savoring, though she does not specifically use that term. But the way she talks about it totally aligns with Amy Ava's definition of savoring. And savoring is a way that she says that we can engage in the world in a grounded physical way, as opposed to a merely cognitive one. So, what I was just saying to you, through our five senses. And Rubin's entire thesis of this book is that this approach of engaging in the world with our five senses is a way to a more joyous, conscious life. So I decided to apply this to my life in a very real way for myself this summer. I have time off, of course, in the summer as an educator, but many of us have the opportunity to work additional hours. We can teach additional summer classes, and for some of us, that results in additional income, which can be very attractive, of course. So people can be attracted to the extra income, and they will sacrifice that time off in the summer so they can earn more money. I chose to forego some of that this summer because I really wanted to give myself the opportunity to rest and to engage in savoring through travel. So I did for myself what I called my summer savoring retreat. I did a series of 11 posts here on LinkedIn where I shared my trip specifically to Italy, which I'll talk about why I always go there. But the reason I did that is I recognized that I was getting exhausted, that component. Thankfully, not cynical and not having inefficacy. So I didn't have those two components of burnout. But I recognized, yeah, I was pretty exhausted from my work over the last several years because since the pandemic, I know some people in their fields lost their jobs, which is difficult in its own way. But for many of us educators, fortunately, we did not lose our job during the pandemic. But overnight, our job got dramatically harder with limited support and limited limited resources. So we had to do an immediate switch and do online distance learning, which is dramatically different from what most of us do on a regular basis. And then our job just continues. So we never actually got a break to rest and recover from that really stressful, exhausting time. So you may be able to relate to that. So I recognize now, 3 years after the start of that pandemic, I needed to be able to rest. So I did the summer savoring retreat. Part of that and why I chose Italy is it allows me to engage in deep play, which in this book, Rest, is one of the forms of rest, where this author talks about 10 different types of rest, how we can rest. deep play. So having a good time and an immersive experience that brings us pleasure and is fun for us is a form of rest. So this was my approach. And why do I always choose Italy? Well, Italy is a place where I can really engage profoundly with my five senses. I do travel to other countries and I really enjoy seeing other cultures, but the answer is pretty simple. Italy is my favorite place on this planet to savor. It is a delight for my five senses all at the same time. So I immersed myself there for several weeks and really just detached, put an out of office on my email, letting people know that I was not available. And what I didn't even plan to do posts. So I was just enjoying the moment and the experience, which once I felt rested after a couple days, actually turned into inspiration, which again in the book Rest, it talks about creativity is often stimulated by rest. I found myself inspired to share content and take 30 minutes out of my day while I was sitting and relaxing to write a post and share it with the community here on LinkedIn. So by deciding not to work while I was on my trip, I was actually inspired to create 11 different posts and share it with you. That didn't feel like work. It was actually fun. The final thing I want to share with you as we get ready to conclude, and again, feel free to share any comments. I'll get to those at the very end, is the book Why Travel Matters, which I've introduced here before on LinkedIn on some of my posts. Fantastic book for those of us who really want to understand how travel has changed our lives. So if you're not just a tourist, you don't just go somewhere to snap photos at famous sites and then you move on with the next thing you want to capture in a photo. For those of us that really love to linger in a place and engage with it and make sense of how we're shifting and changing, this is the book for you. Why Travel Matters, A Guide to the Life-Changing Effects of Travel by author Craig Storty. So it's very simple. Why does travel matter? Because it changes us. That's Storty's thesis of the book. This is on page 130. Storty says, and if we can change, we can grow. So connecting those dots, why does travel matter? Why does travel matter? Let me try that again. Connecting the dots, why does travel matter? Storty says, because if we can change, we can grow. So travel changes us, it grows us. Travel is a tremendous learning experience when we're not merely a tourist, but we're a traveler. So why do I love Italy so much to travel? I already said it's a multi-sensory experience. So it allows me to ground myself back in my body, which supports the work with Gretchen Rubin in Life in Five Senses. And it all fits under the umbrella of what I'm sharing here on LinkedIn to try and inspire people to do, which is gain insights, gain experiences that allow us to be more conscious, which is why I call my work under the umbrella of conscious communication, which is my monthly newsletter. So if you haven't subscribed to that here on LinkedIn, I invite you to do that. It's really about becoming aware of the different influences on our lives and understanding and then better choosing our behaviors instead of just reacting automatically and unconsciously. So it's about inspiring, educating, and empowering people to become more conscious and active creators in our lives. So let's recap before we officially end. I'll look to see if we have any questions. We looked at 6 different books. We looked at Rest. We looked at Sensitive. We looked at The Burnout Challenge, Surviving Teacher Burnout, Life in Five Senses, and Why Travel Matters. I explained how rest, savoring, and travel can help us to prevent burnout. And it's done by managing those 3 dimensions. So not letting all 3 show up at the same time so you don't actually have burnout. Exhaustion, cynicism, and efficacy. Those are the 3 dimensions of burnout to remember. I also shared some experiences from my own summer savoring retreat that I just did this summer in Italy. And I talked about how by planning not to work and making a space just to rest, I actually ended up creating 11 different posts to share with you all and inspire people to learn about the concept of savoring and potentially take a trip, whether it's somewhere local or somewhere abroad, that will allow you to rest and to savor. And I hope that my own journey that I've shared with you here on LinkedIn, that inspires you to take time to enjoy living as much as you enjoy working. Obviously, LinkedIn's a professional platform, so that's why the large majority of us are on here to connect with one another is related to professional things. And I love that too, because I love professional growth and learning. But I also love enjoying life outside of work. So if that's something that you needed to hear today, I hope that it inspires you to carve a path, find a way for you to allow more rest, more savoring for your own life, to add more pleasure and enjoyment. If you enjoy these learning sessions, I invite you to continue learning with me. One great way you can do that is by subscribing to my LinkedIn newsletter here called Conscious Communication. You will find Conscious Communication on my profile, so Gino Parati, and then in the featured section at the top of my profile, you'll find the link for Conscious Communication. You'll just click on that. You click on the subscribe button, and then you'll scroll down. You'll see every edition, every monthly newsletter under that title that I've published. So those come out about monthly. I do take the summers off, which is important to rest. But other than that, they're monthly. We can also talk about individual work. I am a keynote speaker as well. And this year, I've been delivering a keynote about sustainable teaching and learning. How do we rethink the relationship between rigor and rest? So if that's interesting, I'm available to discuss with you about the opportunity to come and speak with your group on how do we rethink how we're working. So it's the old adage of work smarter, not harder, that we're not just giving quantity, we're focusing on quality with the conscious eye of reducing unnecessary work. Why do extra stuff if it's not leading to the outcomes? So let's do work to reach our goals, but not work for the sake of work when it doesn't make sense. And then I also design unique learning experiences. So if you'd like a customized workshop for your organization, feel free to reach out. I'd love to discuss that. Thanks so much for joining. Let me check here in the chat. Great. Thank you. Oh, hi. I'm seeing some familiar names here. Happy to see people here. Hi, Avi. What is considered a normal or acceptable amount of time, whether after starting a new project or to have elapsed before feeling burnout? That's a great question. I did not come across a specific time, Avi, on that to be able to give you an answer for it. I don't even remember them talking about time in the burnout challenge. So it's a good question. Where I would direct you for that is if you have access through an academic library. So if, as a college student, you may have access to the library resources to get academic sources, and you can ask that question, and some articles about research that was done may be able to highlight that answer for you. But my guess from the burnout challenge is that it isn't a specific time, because work is, and I'm thinking about my own past work experiences, you can walk into a situation that's highly disorganized, and then all of a sudden you're like jumping into it. I actually was just texting a friend about that who was asking about, how's everything going? The semester started a couple weeks ago. And what I had mentioned was, I'm off for like 6 weeks in the summer, which is nice, and you're relaxing. And then all of a sudden, boom, you jump into the semester. It's like jumping into the deep end of the pool. There's no casually waiting out. You were off one day, and then the next day you are back to work and you are in it. There's already a ton of work to do, a ton of organizing. So I think in a situation like that, time could be faster. So you can burn out in an academic setting sooner. For other people, it may be burnout through a job that's not necessarily highly taxing physically. Maybe you don't have a ton of work, but your job's really boring and repetitive. So that may take longer. I'm hypothesizing that you just spend so much time over a year or more doing the same thing, and you just start to feel mentally exhausted because you're bored with that. So that's my hypothesis, but I don't have a firm answer for that, Avi. Okay, let's see. Eddie, hi. Nice to see you. Thanks for joining. I'm happy to share. Thank you. Yeah, really good books. I highly recommend that. Eddie and anyone else who would benefit from it as well. One of my past newsletters, I want to say it was May that I published the newsletter before I took the summer off. I gave a list of about 8 different books. I've done a ton of reading this year. So about 8 different books that you'll find, and you'll find links to Amazon or directly to their website for the authors. You can check that out. There may be some additional ones that are really beneficial. Okay, it's 12:30, so it's going to be about time to conclude this. I'll wait just a moment here as I give my final closing to see if anyone else wants to pop a question in that I can answer right before we jump off the learning session. But feel free to share this with other people. I do have a YouTube channel, Right Brain Journey, so it will be available on YouTube. And oh, great! I'm glad to see that. Great. And then this will be posted here on LinkedIn. Our last comment before we end from a LinkedIn user. Thank you for joining. follow up on that. How do you transition smoothly from resting and recovering over and jumping into the fall semester? Yeah, well, how do I do that? There's definitely a level of experience. I've been teaching over 15 years now. So there's a level of process set up. So I think that's part of the essential thing. And feel free to reach out to me. It just says LinkedIn user, so I can't see your name, but feel free to message me directly on LinkedIn and we can chat about it. If you lead academics, if you're like a department chair, for example, then perhaps if processes are not developed to make the transition smoother, where you do step 1, step 2, step 3, so that people can have minimal mental input in the beginning, they can just go through a checklist. It may help them save some energy and time on that. Oh, hey, Namita. Hey there. Good to see you. So that would be my developing process would be my recommendation. And if you're just beginning an academic journey, maybe that's something that hasn't been set up yet. But thank you so much, everybody, for joining. Happy Friday. If you have additional thoughts or questions, feel free to reach out to me directly on LinkedIn. Have a good one. Bye-bye.